Imagine being the queen consort of a great and ancient kingdom and still being told there is a room you may not enter. That is precisely the situation whispered about behind the ivy-covered walls of Ravensmere, the private country seat of the royal house of Wexford. Princess Eleanor, the tireless and famously unsentimental Princess Royal of Caldonshire, has quietly instructed her lawyers to formalize her family's exclusive claim to a private wing of the Ravensmere estate. In doing so, she has effectively closed the door on Queen Isabel's long-rumored plans for a secluded summer retreat at one of the kingdom's most treasured royal residences. So what is really happening at Ravensmere? Why has the most disciplined woman in the House of Wexford drawn a legal line in the sand, and why now? This story, though inspired by the kind of power struggles that unfold in old and wealthy families, is entirely a work of fiction. No real royal family, living or dead, is depicted here, but the questions it raises about loyalty, legacy, and who truly belongs inside the walls of an ancestral home are timeless enough to feel real. To understand the weight of this quiet feud, you first have to understand what Ravensmere represents. It is not merely a house. Within the fictional kingdom of Caldonshire, it is spoken of as the soul of the monarchy itself. The Ravensmere estate spans some 18,000 acres of rolling parkland in the county of Wexfordshire, roughly 90 miles from the capital. It was acquired generations ago by a reigning queen as a wedding gift for her eldest son, and it has remained the private property of the sovereign ever since, never absorbed into the crown's public holdings, never open to government oversight. It belongs in the truest sense to whichever monarch currently sits the throne, passed hand to hand like a family heirloom too precious to entrust to institutions. This distinction matters enormously to the people who live inside it. Ravensmere does not belong to the nation. It belongs to the king. When old King Alaric passed away several winters ago, the estate transferred directly into the possession of his son, King Edmund, the current monarch. It is the place where the extended family gathers every midwinter, where the old queen spent her final, quiet months, and where Edmund's own father chose to live out his last years in a modest cottage on the far edge of the grounds, away from the main house and its endless visitors. Scattered across the estate are a cluster of smaller residences, each with its own history and its own inhabitants. There is the Dower House, once home to a young Princess Marguerite before scandal and tragedy swept her from public life. There is Hartfield Lodge, used by the king's eldest son and his young family. There is Fenwick Cottage, a modest farmhouse where, more recently, a disgraced member of the family has been quietly relocated after a fall from grace so complete it shook the foundations of the monarchy itself. For generations, access to these various corners of Ravensmere was governed not by contracts or deeds, but by unwritten understanding, a gentleman's agreement passed down through the family, honored more out of habit and mutual respect than any legal obligation. But in the turbulent climate of the present day, with old certainties crumbling and old loyalties fraying, these informal arrangements have begun to feel dangerously fragile, and when members of a royal family start calling in lawyers to protect what was once assumed rather than written down, it is usually a sign that trust itself has broken down. Before we can understand the legal maneuver at the heart of this story, we need to address a tension that has simmered beneath the surface of the House of Wexford for nearly 3 decades, the deeply strained relationship between Princess Eleanor and Queen Isabel. This friction did not begin with Isabel's marriage to King Edmund years ago, though that marriage certainly brought it into the open. According to those who have watched the family closely, the discord traces back much further, to a time when Isabel first entered Edmund's orbit while he was still married to his first wife, the beloved and tragic Princess Seraphina. That relationship's slow collapse fractured a family that Eleanor had spent her entire adult life trying to hold together, and she has never quite forgiven the woman she believes was at the center of it. Princess Eleanor is, by nearly every account, the hardest-working member of the royal family. She undertakes more official engagements each year than almost anyone else wearing a crown or a title, and she does so without complaint, without seeking headlines, and without any apparent need for public affection. She is disciplined to the point of severity, precise in her conduct, and fiercely, almost militantly protective of what she sees as the dignity of the institution. She has long been regarded, even by her critics, as the quiet backbone of the modern monarchy, the one who shows up, rain or shine, when glamour is nowhere in sight. Isabel, by contrast, arrived in the royal fold amid what many considered one of the great scandals of her generation. For years, she was deeply unpopular with the public, and coolly tolerated at best by senior members of the family, Eleanor chief among them. Over time, through patience, careful public relations work, and what even her detractors admit has been genuine effort, Isabel has largely rehabilitated her image. She is today a respected and in many circles beloved queen consort. But the old wound between her and Eleanor is never fully healed. It has simply gone quiet, waiting. Sources close to the family in this fictional telling at least describe the current dynamic between the two women as something like a Cold War, one that occasionally flares into open, if carefully contained, conflict. One person familiar with the household reportedly said that Eleanor believes Isabel consistently oversteps the boundaries of her role, while Isabel sees Eleanor as someone who has never been able to separate old family loyalty from clear-eyed judgment. That mutual suspicion, simmering for years, has now found itself a very physical battleground, the grounds of Ravensmere itself. To understand why this particular legal dispute erupted now of all times, you have to follow the thread back to the disgrace of Prince Julian, the king's younger brother. Several months ago, King Edmund formally stripped Julian of his remaining royal titles, his honors, and most consequentially for this story, his right to reside in any property belonging to the crown's public estate. Julian had already become something of a pariah within royal circles, following revelations about his association with a disgraced financier whose crimes had shocked the public and implicated several of his former associates. The scandal deepened further when a memoir written by one of the financier's victims was published posthumously, reigniting public fury and placing Julian's conduct under fresh, unforgiving scrutiny. As a result, Julian was quietly moved out of his sprawling official residence and relocated to Fenwick Cottage, the modest farmhouse tucked away on the Ravensmere grounds, a dramatic downgrade meant to signal, without quite saying so, that his standing within the family had been irrevocably diminished. Then came the morning that changed everything. On Julian's birthday, in the depths of winter, he was formally arrested on suspicion of serious misconduct connected to his years of official duty. Unmarked vehicles descended on Ravensmere, and simultaneous searches were conducted at both Fenwick Cottage and his former residence. Julian was held for questioning for the better part of a day before being released pending further investigation, an event so unprecedented that royal historians scramble to find any comparable moment in the kingdom's long and often turbulent history. In response, King Edmund issued a brief, carefully worded statement. The law, he said, must be allowed to take its course. It is at this point that Princess Eleanor enters the story in earnest, and the quiet family tension begins its slow transformation into something with real legal teeth. According to the version of events imagined here, Eleanor has been quietly but fiercely advocating on her disgraced brother's behalf, not to excuse his conduct, which even she does not defend, but to ensure he is treated with some measure of basic dignity as the investigation unfolds. She has reportedly raised concerns directly with King Edmund about Julian's rapidly deteriorating mental state, and she is said to have become the driving force behind a private family effort to keep the institution from abandoning him entirely, whatever the outcome of the investigation. Queen Isabel, in this telling, has taken the opposite view. She is said to regard any visible gesture of family solidarity toward Julian as a direct threat to the monarchy's already battered reputation, and to believe that the institution's survival depends on a clean public break from him. One person close to the household is imagined as saying that Isabel was genuinely appalled that Eleanor would spend political capital defending Julian at all. What began as a disagreement over how to handle one disgraced relative has, in this fictional account, metastasized into a much broader conflict over space, access, and who ultimately controls the family's private world. So what, precisely, has Eleanor's legal team done, and how has it derailed Isabel's plans for the summer? According to sources close to this fictional narrative, Eleanor's lawyers have formally documented and asserted her family's long-standing, but never written use rights over a specific wing of the Ravensmere estate, the same wing where her household has traditionally stayed during visits, and the same wing where, by informal custom, Julian's rooms have always been kept for him regardless of his official standing. This is not, and importantly should not be understood as, an attempt by Eleanor to claim ownership of property that legally belongs to the king. Rather, it is a formalization of arrangements that have existed for decades on nothing more than mutual understanding. Such moves are not unusual in large hereditary estates. Real or imagined families with generations of overlapping claims often turn informal customs into documented licenses to occupy once trust between the parties begins to erode. It is, in a sense, less an act of aggression than an act of self-protection, though it can certainly be read as both. By formalizing her claim, Eleanor accomplishes two things simultaneously. First, she creates a paper trail that cannot easily be quietly overridden by the palace bureaucracy or reinterpreted after the fact. Second, and perhaps more pointedly, she sends an unmistakable message to Isabel and to the wider royal household. This space is not available for negotiation, and she will not be displaced from it, whatever tensions exist elsewhere in the family. The timing of the move is, in this story, far from accidental. Ravensmere traditionally closes to public visitors for several weeks each summer, a period during which the extended royal family gathers for private events away from the public calendar. There had, according to the narrative, been quiet discussions about Isabel using one of the estate's private wings for an extended personal retreat during precisely this window, a retreat separate from King Edmund, who typically spends his summers at a separate royal residence in the north. By acting when she did, Eleanor effectively closed off that possibility in the one section of the estate her lawyers now formally control. Sources describe Isabel as furious, though the palace, naturally, has made no public comment on what remains, officially, a private family matter. To understand the size of what Isabel has lost in this fictional dispute, it helps to understand her complicated relationship with privacy and property, a relationship that has in many ways defined her adult life. Unlike King Edmund, whose identity is deeply tied to land, lineage, and the great houses of his family, Isabel has historically maintained her independence through spaces of her own. For decades, her sanctuary was a country house she acquired during the difficult years surrounding her first marriage, a place where, for a few precious weeks each year, she could simply be Isabel, rather than a queen consort carrying the full weight of public scrutiny. Earlier this year, in this imagined telling, reports surfaced that Isabel had quietly transferred ownership of that private house, folding her residential life more fully into the formal royal system rather than retaining an independent retreat outside it. Around the same time, King Edmund reportedly purchased a neighboring property, further intertwining the couple's private life in that part of the country. With her old sanctuary gone and the northern estate firmly established as the king's personal retreat, Ravensmere had increasingly come to look, in Isabel's mind, like the natural place to carve out a new private refuge of her own, somewhere she